वक्त विच हुंदियां होइयां भी ध्यान ही ना दिओ, सुनो ही ना। हाँ जी, हिरदे च वजदी है, दिल च वजदी है, पीड़ हुंदी है, किहड़े खूह जाइए असीं। हाँ जी, फिर दूसरी गल जी सब तो वड्डी गल देखो कि क्या कालिया साहब मेरे बड़े सत्कारयोग ने, मेरे मित्र ने। कालिया साहब ने गल मान ली कि जी वाकई जी उन्होंने कानून की उलंघना की सी ते कतर दे विच उन्हां नूं फांसी हुई सी। उहदे तो छड़ा के लिआंदे कहंदे अहीं कहंदे अहीं धन्नवाद करदे हां सॉरी केंद्र सरकार दा, प्रधानमंत्री दा कि 8 जाना बचा के भारतीयां लैके आए ने ते जिहड़ियां साडीਆਂ जाना जेलां दे टंगियां जे ਜਿਹੜੇ 29 साल तो फांसी के तख्ते ते अज भी खड़ोते हैं, उन्हों का की बनूगा? उन्हों का वाली वारस कोई है कि नहीं? कि सिख पंथ दीयां भावनावां कदरां वो राजनीतिक माहौल जो कुछ होया सीगा, एक राजनीति का शिकार होए सीगे, भावना दे विच बह के कीता सीगा, कानून जो टुटा सीगा ते सजावां देतियां, सजावां भुगत रहीआं ते तुसीं ते मोहरे अखां कट कट के पैंदे जे। हाँ जी, सुनते ही कोई नहीं गा। अकाल तख्त साहब वालों आदेश जारी किया होया कि केंद्र सरकार जी अकाल तख्त साहब वालों बनाई हुई कमेटी नूं टाइम दे दिता है? हाँ जी, कोई टाइम नहीं दिता। तुसीं देखो कदों की गल है। हाँ जी, फिर श्रोमणी गुरुद्वारा प्रबंधक कमेटी के प्रधान साहब वार-वार चिट्ठियां लिखते रहने कि सानूं टाइम दिओ, नहीं सुनते। हुण जो तुसीं सुननी ही नहीं गी, किसानी के मसले आप ही कमिटमेंट्स करके, हाँ जी, जिहड़े दिल्ली तो तोरे सी, जिहड़े 13 महीने उत्थे बैठे रहे, कोई कमिटमेंट पूरी की? ICP बनी है अटारी दे उत्ते, पता नहीं अरबां रुपया उसे लगा होना है। हाँ जी, जिहड़ा इंटरनेशनल बॉर्डर के उत्ते जिहड़ा व्यापार दे लई वो बनी UPA के टाइम बनी, ते जदों NDA आ गई है वो व्यापार ही बंद कर दिता गया। कि पंजाब दे नाल धक्का नहीं गया? कि पंजाब दे व्यापारी दा तुसीं व्यापारी दी गल करदे जे, किहड़े व्यापारी दी गल करदे जे जिहदा तुसीं इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड बंद करता? पंजाब के किसान की किहड़ी गल करदे जे जिहड़ा चाहुंदा है कि तुसीं अटारी बार्डर खोलो, वाघा बार्डर खोलो, तां कि साडा जिहड़ा मध्य एशिया नूं है वो साडीआं फसलां जाण, साडा इत्थों व्यापार होवे, पंजाब आर्थिक तौर ते खुशहाल होवे ते व्यापारी भी खुशहाल होवे। उस पासे तो सुनते नहीं। गुजरात ही जाके बंदरगाह तुसीं सारा कुछ ही बनाता, सज्जा खब्बा सारा कुछ ही बंद करता है ते गुजरात की बंदरगाह जिहड़ी है वो सारे व्यापार का जिहड़ा ट्रेड का जिहड़ा सेंटर बनाता है। ये क्यों? पंजाब दे नाल वितकरा क्यों? जदों हिंदुस्तान ते पाकिस्तान भी साझा सीगा उदों भी ट्रेड जिहड़ा लाहौर राही हुंदा सीगा। हाँ जी, हुण तुसीं पता नहीं कित्थों 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 समुद्र दे विच दी घुम के फिर जाके ट्रेड करदे जे, जिहड़ा तुहाडे कोल रस्ता आ ਉਹਦੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ट्रेड करते नहीं तो ना कर देंगे जे, ना मनते ही जे, तो फिर की करना? पंजाबी किधर नूं जाण? सिख संस्थावां दे उत्ते तुसीं हमले करी जांदे जे, ਉਹਦੇ च दखलअंदाजी करी जांदे जे। हरियाणा गुरुद्वारा प्रबंधक कमेटी तुसां वखरी बनाती, दिल्ली कमेटी ते तुसां कब्जा कर लिया, हजूर साहब बोर्ड दे विच तुसीं तब्दीली करती, पटना साहब दे बोर्ड दे विच तब्दीली करती, सिखां दे मसलिਆਂ 'ਚ दखलअंदाजी करके कुछ मिलदा? यही कुछ इंदिरा गांधी करती हुंदी सीगी, यही कुछ इंदिरा गांधी करती सी। पता नहीं क्यों भुल गए, क्यों इतिहास भुल जाते हैं। साडी हथ भर के बेनती है, साडी कोई इन्हां दे नाल कोई वैर विरोध नहीं, कोई साडे वखरेवे नहीं, बड़े निभे हैं, बहुत निभे हैं, हदों वध के निभे हैं, पर निभण दी थां ते कोई कदर करन दी थां ते इन्नी बेकदरी ते चंगी नहीं ना लगदी। तुसीं बेकदरी करी जाओ, असीं निभी जाइए ते असीं अपनी खेतरी पार्टी जिहड़ी पंथ ते पंजाब दी नुमाइंदा पार्टी है वो तुहाडे नाल टिका के खड़ोती होवे ते तुसीं कि गिनती ही ना रखो।
पर वो तो सब इंपॉर्टेंट बयान अमित शाह जी का भी है, क्योंकि थोड़े दिन पहला राइजिंग भारत होया है, उस दे विच उन्होंने कहा सी कि असीं चाहुंदे आ कि सारियां पार्टियां नूं असीं नाल लैके चलीए। ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਉਹ ਬਿਆਨ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਹੁਣ ਬਿਆਨ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਕੀ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਮੁੱਖ ਕੀ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ? ਬੀਜੇਪੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਲੇ ਪੱਖੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੱਲ ਹੋਏ, ਸਾਡੀ ਸੁਣਵਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਗਰ ਐਂਗਲ ਤੋਂ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਸੁਨੀਲ ਜਾਖੜ ਤਾਂ ਦਾਅਵਾ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਵਾਂਗੇ 24 ਚ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਲੜ ਕੇ।
ਦੇਖੋ ਗੁਰਜੋਤ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਤੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਮਤਲਬ ਸ਼ੌਂਕੀਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੋੜਿਆ। ਵਾਜਪਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੀ ਲੀਡਰਸ਼ਿਪ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਦਲ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੇਵਲ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਔਰ ਜੋ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਦਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਾਸ਼ਟਰੀ ਸੱਤਾ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਜਾਂ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਂਡ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ 'ਚ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਨਾਲ ਦਿਨ ਤੋਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕੱਖ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸ਼ਿਵ ਸੈਨਾ ਦਾ ਹਾਲ ਕੀ ਕਰਤਾ ਆ, ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਲਾਈ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹਾਲ ਕੀ ਕਰਤਾ ਆ। ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਪਾਟੋ ਤਾੜ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਹਦੇ ਚ ਵੀ ਮੁੱਖ ਰੂਪ ਚ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਸੀਗੀ। ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੰਗੀਆਂ ਚਿੱਟੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਲੁਕੀ ਛਿਪੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਹੈ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਨੂੰ ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਥਾਂ ਤੇ ਤੋੜਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੋ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੋ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੋ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਕਹੋਗੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਥ ਹੀ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਜੀ। ਮੈਂ ਕੋਈ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੀ ਕਹਤਾ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਕੀ ਮਾੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ, ਪਰ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਭਾਈਵਾਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਦਰ ਵੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਵੀ ਹੱਲ ਕਰਨੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਹੈ।
ठीक है वलटोआ साहब, कोशिश है साडी क्योंकि कालिया साहब चले गए ने और उन्हां तो असीं सवाल जरूर लैंदे कि किस तरीके दे नाल ओह देख रहे ने, क्योंकि हुण मसला है कि सारियां 13 सीटां ते श्रोमणी अकाली दल अते भाजपा अपने वक्खो वखरे कैंडीडेट उतारेगी। की लगदा है वलटोआ साहब 2022 तो लैके 2024 तक किन्ना क लोकां दे दिलां तक कोशिश कर पाई है श्रोमणी अकाली दल अपने खेतरी पार्टी दा या फिर ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਣ ਦਾ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਫਰਕ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ 2 ਸਾਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਹੋਇਆ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਗੁਰਜੋਤ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ 22 ਤਰੀਕ ਦਾ ਮਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੜਿਆ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਪਰ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆ, ਰਾਜਸੀ ਸ਼ਕਤੀ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਰਾਜਸੀ ਸ਼ਕਤੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਪਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਪਹਿਰਾ ਦੇਣਾ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ ਹੀ ਛੱਡਤੇ, ਆਪਣੀ ਹੋਂਦ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਰੇ 'ਚ ਪਾਤਾ, ਰਾਜਸੀ ਸੱਤਾ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੜਦੇ ਰਹੇ, ਰਾਜਸੀ ਸੱਤਾ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਦੀ, ਵੋਟਾਂ ਕਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਮਿਲਦੀਆਂ ਕਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲਦੀਆਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਸੇ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿਧਾਂਤਾਂ ਤੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਤੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਪੰਥ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਂਗੇ।
की जानकारी दी इस तरह की बड़ी खबर का जिक्र कर रहे हैं, जिसका इंतजार लगातार किया जा रहा है कि आखिरकार की इकट्ठे होकर श्रोमणी अकाली दल बीजेपी चोन लड़ेगा, पर इस तरह की बड़ी खबर है अलायंस नहीं हो रहा, यानी कि गठजोड़ के तहत चोणां लड़ियां नहीं जाणगियां। दोवां पार्टियां दे वल्लों वखरे वखरे तौर ते चोन लड़ी जाएगी। पंजाब के बेहतर भविख के लिए यह फैसला लिया है, सुनील जाखड़ कह रहे हैं और उन्होंने भी कहा कि पंजाब के हक दे विच भाजपा ने इतिहासिक काम कीते ने, तां पंजाब दे लोग 1 जून नूं भाजपा नूं होर मजबूत बनाउणगे, यह दावा है सुनील जाखड़ दा। तां वड्डी खबर दा जिक्र कर रहे हैं। सो दस दें कि पंजाब दे विच श्रोमणी अकाली दल दे वल्लों 22 मार्च ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੋਰ कमेटी की मीटिंग की गई सी, उसदे विच ही हालांकि यह अंदेशा लग रहा सी जिस तरीके दे नाल उन्होंने फैसला सुनाया, क्योंकि इस दे विच इंतजार किया जा रहा सी कि मोहर लगेगी कि आखिरकार भाजपा दे नाल रल के चोणां लड़नियां ने या फिर नहीं। पर जिस तरीके दे नाल उन्होंने कहा कि केंद्र सरकार दे वल्लों बंदी ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੀ रिहाई ते होर बहुत सारे मुद्दे ने उन्हां नूं पूरा किया जावे, तां उस तों अंदाजा जरूर लग रहा सी, क्योंकि लंबे समय तो यह गलबात चल रही सी दोवां पार्टियां दे विचाले, लंबे समय तो चर्चावां चल रही सन कि दिल्ली दे विच मीटिंग हो रही है और इवन अमित शाह दे वल्लों भी राइजिंग भारत दे विच इसदा जिक्र किया गया सी।
भारतीय जनता पार्टी पंजाब दे लोक सभा चोण कल्ले लड़न जा रही है। आ फैसला पार्टी ने लोकां दी राय, पार्टी दे वर्कर्स दी राय, लीडर साहिबान दी वख-वख राय, उन्हां सारिਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਭਵਿੱਖ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਜਵਾਨੀ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਕਿਸਾਨੀ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਪਾਰੀ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਸਨਅਤਕਾਰ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਮਜ਼ਦੂਰ, ਸਾਡਾ ਪਿਛੜਿਆ ਵਰਗ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਬਿਹਤਰੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਇੱਕ ਉਜਵਲ ਭਵਿੱਖ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਲਿਆ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੋ ਕੰਮ ਬੀਜੇਪੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੇ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਮੋਦੀ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਰਹਿਨਮਾਈ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਓਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ। ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫਸਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਇੱਕ ਦਾਣਾ ਪਿਛਲੇ 10 ਸਾਲ ਚੱਕਿਆ ਗਿਆ MSP ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੀ ਭੁਗਤਾਨ ਹੈ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਅੰਦਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖਾਤਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਹੁੰਚੀ ਹੈ। ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਲਾਂਘਾ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸਦੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੋਕ ਖੁੱਲੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਦੀਦਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੰਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਮੋਦੀ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਰਹਿਨਮਾਈ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿਰਪਾਲਤਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮਿਹਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਬਖਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ, ਆ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਮੋਦੀ ਜੀ ਦੀ BJP ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਆ ਬਖਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਸੁਨਹਿਰਾ ਭਵਿੱਖ ਆ ਮੰਨ ਕੇ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਬਿਹਤਰੀ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਸੁਰੱਖਿਅਤ ਭਵਿੱਖ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਸਰਹੱਦੀ ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤੀ, ਇੱਥੇ ਅਮਨ ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਭਾਰਤ ਅੱਗੇ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਮੱਦੇਨਜ਼ਰ ਆ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪੂਰਾ ਯਕੀਨ ਹੈ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ 1 ਜੂਨ ਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ BJP ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਮਜ਼ਬੂਤ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ ਉન્નਤੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ BJP ਨੂੰ ਵੋਟ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਹੁਮਾ ਕੇ ਪਾਣਗੇ।
सुनील जाखड़ का बयान है। पंकज कपाई मेरे सहयोगी फोन लाइन से जुड़ चुके हैं। पंकज, दोवें पार्टियां वक्खो वक्खरे चोण लड़नगियां, की फायदे ते की नुकसान दोवां?
देखो, काफी अहम है क्योंकि हुण तक लगातार चर्चावां सीगियां कि कदों गठजोड़ होएगा नहीं होएगा, किन्नियां सीटां ते गठजोड़ होएगा, क्योंकि दोवें पासों हिंट दिते जा रहे थे कि गठजोड़ नूं लैके। लेकिन तमाम समीकरण देखण तो बाद हुण भाजपा दे वल्लों यह फैसला लिता गया है कि कल्ले 13 ਦੀਆਂ 13 सीटां ते चोण ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਲੜੇਗੀ। ਸੁਨੀਲ ਜਾਖੜ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਦੇ ਸੂਬੇ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੋਸ਼ਲ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਜ਼ਰੀਏ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਾ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਕਾਫੀ ਅਹਿਮ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਰਾਜਨੀਤੀ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਲੋਕ ਸਭਾ ਚੋਣਾਂ ਦੀ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਸਾਫ਼ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਨਾ ਹੋਣ ਦੀਆਂ ਦੋ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਾ ਉਹ ਕੇਂਦਰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਲਵੇ, ਜੋ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਕੋਡ ਆਫ ਕੰਡਕਟ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ। ਦੂਸਰਾ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਮੰਨੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸੀਟਾਂ 5 ਤੋਂ 6 ਭਾਜਪਾ ਮੰਗ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਸੀਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਤਣ ਦੀ ਕੈਪੈਸਿਟੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸੀਗੀ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸੀਟਾਂ 7 ਤੋਂ 8 ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਖਾਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਤਣ ਦੀ ਕੈਪੈਸਿਟੀ ਸਿਰਫ 2 ਸੀਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸੀਗੀ। ਤਾਂ ਸੀਟ ਬਦਲਣ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੜੀ ਔਰ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਤਸਵੀਰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਦਾ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਔਰ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਇਕੱਲੇ 13 सीटां ते चोण जिहड़ी है लड़ेगी।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल वड्डी खबर है इस वेले दी, बेहद वड्डी खबर है सियासत दे नाल जुड़ी हुई, यानी कि साफ तौर ते हुण वक्खो वक्खरियां दोवें पार्टियां सानू नजर आउणगियां। पंजाब दी सियासत दे नाल जुड़ी अहम इस वेले दी खबर, भाजपा अकाली दल दे विचाले गठजोड़ नहीं होया है, यानी कि साफ है कि 13 ਦੀਆਂ 13 सीटां ते सानू भाजपा दे और श्रोमणी अकाली दल दे वक्खो वक्खरे ਜਿਹੜੇ कैंडीडेट्स ने, उम्मीदवार ने, ਉਹ नजर आउणगे। और ਇਹ ਵੀ बेहद अहम है कि हुण तक कोई भी पार्टी ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਅਜਿਹਾ ਉਮੀਦਵਾਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਅਤੇ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਐਲਾਨਿਆ ਸੀ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿਚਾਲੇ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹ ਚਰਚਾ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ, ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੀਟਿੰਗਾਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਅਮਿਤ ਸ਼ਾਹ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਆਖਿਰਕਾਰ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੇਹੱਦ ਅਹਿਮ ਨੇ। ਪੰਕਜ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹਾਂਗੇ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕੋਰ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੀ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਕੇਂਦਰ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਰ-ਵਾਰ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਿਹਾਈ ਅਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਕਈ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਲ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਤੋਂ ਕੇਂਦਰ ਨੂੰ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਡਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਰਿਹਾ।
ਦੇਖੋ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਦੋ ਨੇ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇਕਰ ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੋ ਮਸਲੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੜੀ ਜਾਣੀ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਦੋਵਾਂ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈ ਰਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਨੂੰ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹੋਏਗਾ। ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਬੀਜੇਪੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗਈ ਸੀਗੀ। ਦੂਸਰਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਨੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੜਨੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਉਸੇ ਦੇ ਸੰਦਰਭ ਨਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਤਿਆਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਏਜੰਡੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਰੱਖੇ ਹੋਏ ਸੀਗੇ। ਔਰ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ, ਸੁਨੀਲ ਜਾਖੜ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਬਾਬਤ ਵੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਕਿ ਕੇਂਦਰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਦੀ ਬਣੀ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਰਤਾਰਪੁਰ ਕੋਰੀਡੋਰ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕਈ ਸਾਰੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਦੱਸੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁਨੀਲ ਜਾਖੜ ਦੀ ਅਗਵਾਈ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਇਕੱਲੇ 13 ਦੀਆਂ 13 ਸੀਟਾਂ ਤੇ ਚੋਣ ਲੜੇਗੀ ਔਰ ਅਗਲੇ ਇੱਕ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਹੁਣ 13 ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਉਸ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਭਾਜਪਾ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਐਲਾਨੀ ਜਾਏਗੀ। ਜੀ बिल्कुल ठीक है, थोड़ा रुक करांगे ਅਸੀਂ। पंकज दा बड़ी खबर ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ और कोशिश होएगी कि फटाफट रिएक्शन जरूर ले जान कि आखिरकार किस तरीके ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਏਗਾ, क्योंकि बिल्कुल सियासत ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ 2024 ਦੀ ਹੁਣ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਏਗੀ। ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰੀਏ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦਾ ਬਸਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਸੀਗਾ ਔਰ 2022 ਦੀ ਇਕੱਠੀ ਚੋਣ ਲੜੀ, ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਬਸਪਾ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਐਲਾਨ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ। ਤਾਂ ਵਿਰਸਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਵਲਟੋਹਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਆਗੂ ਜੁੜ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਨੇ ਫੋਨ ਲਾਈਨ ਤੇ। ਵਲਟੋਹਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇੰਤਜ਼ਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਕਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਖਬਰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏਗਾ, ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਸੁਨੀਲ ਜਾਖੜ ਨੇ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ। ਕੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਮੰਨੀਏ? ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੋ ਅਗਰ ਅਹਿਮ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਮੰਨੀਏ ਕਿ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਿਆ।
ਗੁਰਜੋਤ, ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਕਿ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੇ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਚੱਲਦੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੇ ਚਰਚਾ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਵੱਲ ਤੋਂ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਹੰਗਾਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਭਰਿਆ ਗਿਆ। ਚਾਹੇ ਜਾਖੜ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕੈਪਟਨ ਅਮਰਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਣੀ ਪ੍ਰਨੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਨੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਅਮਿਤ ਸ਼ਾਹ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਤੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੁਖਬੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਦਲ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਬਿਆਨ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ? ਹੁਣ ਚਰਚਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਛੇੜੀ ਜਾਓ, ਪੁੱਛੀ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਾਓ, ਇਹ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਹੁਣ ਮੁੱਕਦੀ ਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਦਿਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੋਰ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੀ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ 22 ਤਰੀਕ ਨੂੰ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਏਜੰਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆ, ਆਪਣੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਟੈਂਡ ਕੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬੜਾ ਲੰਬਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ, ਪਰ ਗੱਠਜੋੜ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਹਿਯੋਗੀ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਸਮੱਸਿਆਵਾਂ ਸੁਣੋ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਮਸਲੇ ਸੁਣੋ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਸਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੱਲ ਵੀ ਕਰੋ। ਕੋਈ ਹਾਂ ਪੱਖੀ ਹੁੰਗਾਰਾ ਤੇ ਭਰੋ। ਇੱਥੇ ਤੇ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਸਿੱਖ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਮੰਗਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ, ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧਕ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਵਾਰ-ਵਾਰ ਚਿੱਠੀਆਂ ਲਿਖਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਤੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਮਝੀ। ਔਰ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਆਦੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਭਾਰਤ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੋਈ 5 ਮੈਂਬਰੀ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰੇ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੱਸੋ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਪੰਥ ਦੀ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਗੀ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਜਾਊਗੀ ਜੀ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਏਜੰਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਕੀਤਾ। ਅੱਜ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰਾ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੜਨਾ। ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਇਤਰਾਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ ਔਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਵਿਚਾਰਧਾਰਾ ਤੇ ਕਾਇਮ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋਏ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਇਸ ਖਿੱਤੇ ਦੀ ਖੇਤਰੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਹੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਹਿੱਤਾਂ ਲਈ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਇਡਿਆਲੋਜੀ ਛੱਡਤੀ, ਆਪਣੀ ਵਿਚਾਰਧਾਰਾ ਛੱਡਤੀ, ਆਪਣੇ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਛੱਡਤੇ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਛੱਡਤੇ, ਫਿਰ ਕਾਲੀ ਖੇਤਰੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਘਰੇ ਬੈਠੋ।
ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਦੋ ਰਾਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੀਟਿੰਗਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਇਸ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਖੁਦ ਵੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਜਵਾਬ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਨੋਰੰਜਨ ਕਾਲੀਆ ਜੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਨੇ ਫੋਨ ਲਾਈਨ 'ਤੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ। ਮਨੋਰੰਜਨ ਕਾਲੀਆ ਜੀ, ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਬਟਵਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਖੁੱਲ ਕੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਭਰੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਅਜਿਹਾ ਬਿਆਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ। ਇਹ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਬੀਜੇਪੀ ਕਰਦੀ ਰਹੀ ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਮਨਾ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਲਾਈਅੰਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਪਾ ਰਿਹਾ। ਕੀ ਕਹੋਗੇ ਕਾਲੀਆ ਸਾਹਿਬ?
And as we said, we are waiting. The news conference from local officials has been delayed a number of times. So we are now in the second delay.
राजनीति नालों सिद्धांत ऊपर है, तो इस तरह उन्होंने इस गल दे विच कि कोई समझौते का जिहड़ा हैगा संभावना ढूंढन लगदी है। दा मतलब ये है उस नाते अज साडे प्रदेश अध्यक्ष भारतीय जनता पार्टी श्री सुनील जाखड़ जी ने बयान दिता है कि अकाली समझौता नहीं होगा। समय समय से होता है, कई बार शौकी अकाली दल भारतीय जनता पार्टी अच्छे चुनाव लड़े हैं, कई बार अच्छे अलग भी चुनाव लड़े हैं। सो समय की मांग अनुसार जिहड़ा हैगा
ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਦੋ ਰਾਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਕਾਲੀਆ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕੀ ਮੀਟਿੰਗਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਔਰ ਸਮੱਸਿਆ ਜੇਕਰ ਕਹੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਦੋ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਮਹਿਆਂ ਆਈ ਹੈ? ਹਾਲਾਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਚਰਚਾ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸੀਟ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਜੇ ਵੀ ਚਰਚਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸੀਟ ਸ਼ੇਅਰਿੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਦਿੱਕਤ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਵਲਟੋਆ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਦੋ ਮੇਨ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੇਂਦਰ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ, ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਿਹਾਈ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕਿਹਾ, ਉਸ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਰੇ ਉਤਰੇ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਮੱਸਿਆ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਈ ਹੈ।
देखो ऐसा है कि कोई फॉर्मल मीटिंग तो मेरा ख्याल नहीं हुई। सो प्रेस द्वारा जिहड़ियां डिमांड वक्-वक् लीडर्स वालों आंदियां गई हैं, तो लेकिन अपने श्रोमणी अकाली दल के अध्यक्ष सुखबीर बादल जी ने गल कही हैगी है कि सिद्धांत साडा राजनीति नाल उपर है। सो उस नाते जिहड़ा उन्होंने डिफाइन तो नहीं किया बाकी सिद्धांतां दे बारे जिहड़ी गल्लां कीतियां उन्हां ने, तो उस निर्णय के एवज दे विच सुनील जाखड़ जी ने बयान दे दित्ता जी।
ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਹੀਏ ਕਿ ਚਰਚਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਿਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਚੜ ਪਾ ਰਹੀ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਖਰੀ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਬੀਜੇਪੀ ਨੇ ਖੁਦ ਬਖੂਦ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਫਾਈਨਲ ਕੋਈ ਟਾਕ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ? ਕਾਲੀਆ ਸਾਹਿਬ
ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਦੋਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਹੀ ਆ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼੍ਰੋਮਣੀ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਦਲ ਦਾ ਬਿਆਨ ਆਇਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਨਤਾ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਬਿਆਨ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ, ਸੋ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ ਨਾ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਜੋ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਇਆ ਸਿਨੈਰੋ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਇਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਿਕ ਰਿਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਾਖੜ ਜੀ।
अच्छा, चर्चा तो किसी पॉइंट तो शुरू हुई होएगी कालिया साहब?
नहीं, कोई फॉर्मल कोई बैठक नहीं हुई ना, कोई भी जिहड़ी हैगी है। तो सो उन्हां दी जिहड़ा एक रिएक्शन अकाली दल ने दिता, दूसरा ओहदा रिएक्शन बीजेपी ने दिता ओहदा।
One of us who are Marylanders, the words that the key bridge is gone, it still shakes us, because for 47 years that's all we've known. And so this is not just unprecedented from what we're seeing and what we're looking at today. It's heartbreaking.
Governor, can you confirm that the crew on the ship alerted authorities that it had lost propulsion and was in trouble?
We can confirm that the crew notified authorities of a power issue. Yes.
And that they had lost power on the ship.
Yes.
A total of 8. One rescued and in hospital. One not in hospital, but it is, we've communicated with that person. And then 6 that we are searching for.
And all construction workers working on the bubble? With all 8 of them?
Yes, they were all related to the construction program, yes.
We heard that multiple vehicles went into the water. Any word on how many vehicles went into the water and the condition of those people that were in the vehicle?
Not at this time.
All right, we'll shift over here. Was there any way to shut down the bridge? Was there enough time for that distress call to trigger something like that?
Now, the thing that we know is that, even as the boat was coming in, we had a ship that was coming in at 8 knots. So coming in at a very rapid speed. We do know that the investigation is currently going on. But I have to say I'm thankful for the folks who once the warning came up and once notification came up that there was a mayday, who literally by being able to stop cars from coming over the bridge, these people are heroes. They saved lives last night.
Governor, the focus is on rescue now and humanity. But looking forward, is there any vision for how long it could possibly take to move the wreckage, to rebuild, how it could possibly be done? Can you look into the future ahead at all at this point?
This is going to be a long-term build. It's going to be a build that's going to require every facet and every aspect of our society. It is something that I can tell you we are going to get this done. We are going to make sure that this is not just rebuilt, but that we are going to rebuild in a way that remembers the people who this tragedy has impacted, and also do it in a way that honors the community that it serves. But right now, I could not give you any form of estimate on timing or cost. Right now, my and all of our exclusive focus is we're just trying to save lives.
Can the mayor talk on the state of emergency locally, please?
Yes, thank you. Listen, we know the governor issued a state of emergency, but we at the local level felt the need to do that too, because there may be some things that we have to encumber with our fire department and other agencies that we'll be able to pull down support for as we all work together, again, as we're focused right now on saving lives and working through this unspeakable tragedy.
All right, you're just listening in there to the governor of Maryland, the mayor of Baltimore as well, here on Live Now from Fox. That was from just a little bit ago, earlier on in the day, as they provided several updates along the way. Not a ton of information right now as we continue to wait for an update from the NTSB. This is expected to come at about 2:30 Eastern time, so about an hour away from that. And we're also getting a live picture there of just the wreckage, the damage there left behind by this. And of course, this bridge dates back to the 1970s. We'll have much more on this and all these latest headlines here on Live Now from Fox. Stick with us. We'll be right back. right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we want to continue to cover the latest developments on this bridge collapse after a cargo ship crashed into part of its foundation. This is a live picture here on Live Now from Fox of some of the wreckage, and we're continuing to follow it and understand more about both the recovery efforts of it and also the bridge itself. We want to be joined right now by Roberto Leone, a structure engineering professor at the Virginia Tech University. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you have a PhD in civil engineering as well. This is very much an area of expertise for you. And you are obviously in Blacksburg, Virginia, not necessarily close to Baltimore. But what's it like to see this image? And have you ever driven across the Francis Scott Key Bridge before?
Well, yes. First of all, thank you for having me. I have driven over the bridge a couple of times on my way to New York City, and also have seen it from a distance when I've been in Baltimore. It's a very iconic structure in many ways. The people don't realize how they associate structures like bridges with their cities. You know, you think the Golden Gate in San Francisco and the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and signature bridges, so the Eads Bridge in St. Louis, etc. So, people don't realize what attachment they have to bridges until something like this happens.
Yeah, a very tragic scene. And of course, we're just going to continue to put up some video just to give people an update on where we stand, what we're looking at throughout this day, because there are a lot of distinct visuals as well. Can you give me a little bit of background on maybe looking at through a civil engineer's eyes? What type of bridge was this, and maybe what do we see when we look at that Francis Scott Key Bridge? What did we see?
So what you're looking at is at what we call a through arch bridge, and so you can see the arch, and the deck is suspended or hanging from the arch itself. But atypical of an arch, it doesn't end at the supports, but then continues over. So this is a steel truss bridge. It was built at the time when we were building expanding, I should say, the interstate highway system. Structurally speaking, it's a very efficient bridge, and has lasted for a very long time. It was considered to be in fair condition. Unfortunately, at the time when this was built, we weren't considering the kind of bridge impact that you're seeing here and the bridge protections that are needed. You do see two small structures there that are sometimes called dolphins that try to protect the bridge. But nowadays, we will be needing something much, much more stout. We'll probably be thinking of little islands or so-called dolphins that are maybe 80 feet in diameter, and there might be 3 or 4 around the bridge to protect it. Because once the bridge is hit by a large ship like this, there's nothing to do. As an analogy, I will tell you, right, if you go into Washington, D.C., and you see that we are trying to protect buildings against terrorism, right, what you see are bumpers all over the place to make sure that vehicles cannot get closer. It is much easier to protect from a distance than to try to build the structure to resist those enormous forces.
That is a very interesting analogy, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but I also wanted to touch on the fact of the age of this bridge, and we also learned that the governor saying it's up to code, which is obviously very good, but it was built in the 1970s, started in 1972, finished in 1977, costing $110 million. You can only imagine what a bridge like that would cost today. In terms of just the date of this bridge and when it was built, how much has technology changed? How much maybe has thinking around building bridges changed in those decades since it was built?
Well, it has actually changed quite a bit, of course. And today we might be looking at a different option. And so, for example, to reconstruct this bridge, they might think about building a cable-stayed bridge as opposed to this type of bridge. They might think also, of widening the channel, right? Of moving the supports out so they're easier to protect and far away from danger. We will be looking at much larger design loads for the lateral loads. One thing that I was looking at this morning and looking at pictures of the bridge from probably 2 or 3 years ago, and you notice that the bridge is sitting on hinges at the top of the piers, and that these hinges look pretty small, and I know that they're correctly designed, don't get me wrong, but they are going to look slender to people, and people are going to wonder, how could those things just hold the entire bridge? Well, they are, and they were designed just fine. This bridge was in good condition. I think it was being well maintained from what I could tell about the inspection records. But again, this is what we called an unusual event or a special event. The AASHTO Bridge Code now considers this kind of impact, but when this bridge was designed, it was not there. And the analogy I will make another one is the Twin Towers were never designed to be hit by airplanes. Now they did very well, and the fire destroyed them. But the structures are very stout, but also we can't design economically for everything. And so we designed for a very, very low probability of failure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, you don't expect something like this dramatic scene to happen, unfold overnight there in Baltimore, Maryland. You did get into another point that I want to talk about, in the fact that they say it's up to code, and maybe how codes have also changed along with technology and just different strategy around building bridges. When they say it's up to code, what do they mean?
Well, in this case, it means that the bridge, generally speaking, when we say it meets code, it was when it was designed, right? Because we couldn't possibly update it. Now, that's the original design, but it's the maintenance really that they are addressing nowadays, making sure that all the important structural elements are in good condition, that there's not a lot of corrosion or cracking in the slabs or in the columns and things like that. So bridges like this get inspected thoroughly at least every 2 years. And so it's really the inspection reports, I think, that they are talking about. Because of course it will be impossible. Think of trying to keep a building up to code. We put out a new building code every 5 to 6 years. If you had to retrofit your building or your bridge to the newest code, it will be impossibly expensive. So we essentially grandfather them. However, if we find in a new code that there is something that we have discovered that was not really considered when the bridge was or building was built, we will go back and fix it. So I think that's what they are saying. And I don't think the bridge is culpable in any way here. The bridge has got hit by something, so people don't really understand how big these ships are. This is a 10,000 TEU ship. It's enormous. It's like 1,000. It's 1,000 feet long, and just the momentum that it carries, right? And so once it lost control, there was no turning it, right? And so the only thing that we can do in a situation like that is protect the bridge with what are called dolphins or structures of that type, and try to have a ship like this hit the dolphins and basically steer away from the bridge pier. Yeah. But any direct hit is going to be a most likely a failure.
Yeah, catastrophic that we saw. And of course, we're putting up these images right now. Let's get into the dolphin kind of aspect of it, because you can't predict the future when you're building this bridge back in 1977. You kind of can allude to what potentially could be coming, but you don't know the technology, both in the automobile industry, but also in the shipping industry as well with those ships. And you're talking about it as well. If this bridge was built, or a bridge similar was built like it, talk about the dolphins and those different maybe deterrents around it, because this cargo ship lost control, lost power, didn't really, obviously the governor saying it wasn't intentionally going into this bridge. In terms of the dolphins, how would those look differently now if it was built now versus 1977?
Well, I would expect to see, for a bridge of this size, probably about 6 dolphins on the side. And so give me just apologies for that.
You're okay. Keep going if you can still hear us.
Okay, yes. So you would probably see perhaps about 6 of these big round structures that we call dolphins. They're about 80 feet in diameter. some of them, or even larger. And they will be sometimes connected to each other to create like a frame. And so the idea is that if a ship which is out of control, which is really the only reason that a ship would be there, a ship or a barge, then this will move them out.
That is very, very interesting. Of course, we're continuing on, and of course you might have something off the screen right now, but we appreciate your time here on Live Now from Fox. Can we continue? I still have a couple more questions.
Give me just 1 second here to see. I'm not sure.
That's all right. We'll continue this conversation. Stick with us, Roberto, if we can. I'm going to slide away for a quick 2-minute break, and then we'll get into more here on Live Now from Fox.
Right.
All right, welcome back in here to Live and Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Thank you so much for joining us. Still awaiting that press conference from the NTSB coming up in just about 45 or so minutes. Let's get back into this conversation with Roberto Leone, and of course, plenty of obligations there for you, sir. So we appreciate your time, a professor of structural engineering at Virginia Tech. We were just talking about those dolphins as well as the construction of this bridge dating back to 1977. In terms of materials, can we get into that now? How have those changed, and what is this bridge made of?
So this bridge is made out of steel, and mostly steel. And actually, the strength of steels have not changed significantly. Probably most of this bridge was built with steel that has a strength of what we call 50,000 pounds per square inch. So think about hanging something that weighs 50,000 pounds on 1 square inch of that steel. Very strong. So there is not a problem with that. If you look at the bridge, however, you will notice that these members that we called the elements on the bridge, the top chords and bottom chords of a truss, and the diagonals, those are long and slender. So in a bridge of this type, we worry not so much about strength, but about what we call buckling, which is what happens when you take something that's very slender and you press it and it buckles, right? And so that can happen in a bridge of this type, exactly like I just did with this little piece of paper here. And so we have many different things that we design for in bridges. I will only say that typically a big bridge of this type, the engineers will look at several hundred different load scenarios to figure out exactly how to design the bridge. So again, the reason this bridge went down is because we cannot possibly design a bridge of this size for very large lateral forces. We designed it for the wind forces. We designed it for a new one will be designed for collision. We also have ice forces and wave forces and so on, but that's nothing like the load that this bridge saw with this big ship. So I'm very comfortable saying that we have very, very good bridge design specifications. We keep updating the ASHTA, the American Association of State and Highway Transportation Officials, puts out a new code. And right now, if I were to show you this, the books will be about 3 volumes that high, just to give you an idea. And so these are specialized structures. There are companies that do this for a living, and they do it very well. Again, we don't see bridge failures of this type very often.
Yeah, that is a very good point. That's very interesting, just to kind of look back in 1977 and steel being basically the same quality or the same strength for that tenure. And I do want to ask you, because you talked about the buckling, you talked about just the forces as well. This bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, was 1.6 miles long. It stretched that long. In terms of both design, about how kind of figuring out where you want to put the bridge, but also the length of the bridge, how much does that factor into just the engineering of it all?
Well, of course, the main controlling factor here, I would say, is the center span. How wide you have to put the piers and where you can put the piers. Sometimes you put the piers where you have rock or a very competent soil that you can build the foundations on. So that's a constraint that Mother Nature puts on us. So how you exactly do that depends on the location. It's not like we can just nilly-willy build it everywhere. And so, for example, again, thinking of this bridge, when they reconstruct it, they might decide to make the center span wider to help protect the bridge. But this is basically on a site-by-site basis that the bridge engineers decide what is the length, what is the type of bridge. Typically, again, you will see these long approaches that might be reinforced concrete and relatively short spans compared to the long spans that you have over water. And the spans over water are really controlled by, what kind of ship traffic you expect to see there, right? Think of trying to get, let's say, an aircraft carrier under there, right? Or a very large container ship. Those might be the controlling factors. Yeah. And so there are many variables that go into this.
Yeah, we're looking at these are live images from our Sky Fox team there as potentially a backup in terms of those shipping containers with the collapse of this bridge. My last question for you before I let you go, sir, and we're awaiting this press conference from the NTSB coming up in just a little bit. Maybe in terms of what you're looking at from your perspective, through your lens as a structural engineer, maybe what information are you looking to gather, and what information do you hope they tell you about during this press conference that we're expecting in 45 some odd minutes?
So my specialties are actually in earthquake engineering, and so we are at the stage now of rescue operations, and so this will take a little while, and then maybe a day to several days, and then they will start thinking very seriously about what to do. In this case, I've already heard that it's been declared a state emergency, and the federal government is going to provide all the help that they can. And so essentially at this point, as a structural engineer, the biggest need is how we're going to remove all of this out. And clear the channel so the port can reopen, which is, I think, the most important thing at this point for the operation of the port. And then, without impacting the environment too much, and then start thinking about reconstruction, right? The bridge that collapsed in Minneapolis in 2007, the I-35W bridge, basically the state and the federal government remove all the obstacles to the design and construction, and they redid it in 1 year. This one is going to take longer, I think, just because of the situation, you're having to keep the channel open and so on. But I think that it's a real challenge to the engineering profession here to come up with a very quick way of replacing this bridge. And so that's really the challenge for us, because it cannot be done the conventional way. A bridge of this type, the conventional way from start of design to finish, if everything were right, is probably 5-6 years.
Wow.
And certainly Baltimore cannot afford that.
Yeah, of course. That is very interesting. And of course, you know, back to Minneapolis as well, and that bridge collapsed as well. Roberto Leon, thank you so much. Great insight there. It's always very interesting to see all these experts, different perspectives as well. We appreciate your time. We're going to let you go because I know you have other obligations throughout this day. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much.
Have a great day.
All right, we're going to continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Great conversation there about this. And of course, coming up in about half an hour, 40 or so minutes, we're expecting an update there from the NTSB. This press conference has been pushed back several times today, just based on different availabilities. We heard from President Biden as well. We'll get into those remarks again in just a little bit. But of course, this is the NTSB newsroom saying the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore investigation underway for the collapse. We'll have that and much more here on Live Now from Fox. Let's slide away for our final 2-minute break of this hour. Welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. And as a reminder, coming up in just about half an hour, we're expecting to hear from the NTSB. And of course, this is just a set time, and that has changed throughout the morning. And you can imagine they're dealing with a lot of different factors there. We're talking to different experts there about both the rescue and the recovery, potentially six individuals, a construction crew still unaccounted for. That is the last check we had. Of course, we're hearing from the Baltimore mayor as well as the Maryland governor. We're hearing from President Biden. And for more on this, let's just give you a little bit of context of what we're going on, what we're following here throughout this morning here on Live Now from Fox. Let's listen into Rebecca Castor's latest report on this bridge collapse in Maryland.
The Francis Scott Key Bridge plunging into the Patapsco River in Baltimore on Tuesday after officials say it was struck by a large container ship. The crash causing multiple vehicles to fall into the chilly water. The city's fire department says some people have been found while the search continues for others.
Everything so far indicates that this was a terrible accident. At this time, we have no other indication, no other reason to believe there's any intentional act here.
The incident unfolded around 1:30 a.m. local time. Video shows a ship called the Dolly appearing to crash into one of the bridge's support beams, causing parts of the structure to snap. The owner of the vessel says it was headed to Sri Lanka. All crew members, including 2 harbor pilots, have been accounted for, with no reported injuries.
The channel's only 150 yards, so it's really tight through there, but something had to be massively awry for them to run into the bridge.
The bridge spans the Patapsco River, which leads to the Port of Baltimore, a major shipping port on the East Coast. Vessel traffic into and out of the area is suspended, as officials say the focus remains on finding those still missing.
We're going to continue to work in partnership with every part of government to do everything that we can to get us through the other side of this tragedy.
All right, thank you so much for that update. 2:30 Eastern Time, NTSB is expecting to provide an update right here on Live Now from Fox. And we also have a couple other live pictures, including the State Department briefing, and they were just asked a question about this update in Baltimore. Let's take you out to this live event here on Live Now from Fox, just to give you up-to-dates, because obviously plenty of headlines internationally as well. Let's listen in.
We arrested them and I humiliated them.
We believe that
okay, so
okay.
Busy news day. So there is funding for UNRWA that was suspended. Given that the minibus prohibits funding of UNRWA through 2025, what will happen to the suspended funding? Is it still available where the U.S. defined the investigation into UNRWA employees allegedly involved in October 7th satisfactory, or is it going to go back to the Treasury Department?
It's funding that we can use for other humanitarian assistance priorities.
Okay, and then regarding what happened in Baltimore, the bridge collapse, it was a ship that had a Singaporean flag, and then it was supposed to go to Sri Lanka. Has the United States been in touch with Sri Lanka and Singapore over the incident?
I'm not aware of any contacts with Sri Lanka. The U.S. Embassy Singapore has been in contact with Singapore's Maritime Port Authority, which has offered to provide assistance to the U.S. Coast Guard.
And does the U.S. expect this tragedy to interrupt international commerce?
I'm not going to speak to it from here. I would defer to other agencies. Obviously, the Port of Baltimore has been closed. You heard the president speak to the fact that they want to get it reopened as soon as possible. But I'd refer to an agency with more direct responsibility to comment and to offer any kind of actual assessment of the effect on shipping.
Thank you so much.
Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. A few separate topics. Let me start with Evan Gershkovich. Today, Russian court extended his detention beyond 1 year until June, which one might argue that contradicts against even their own laws. Prosecutors are allowed to expand only complex cases beyond 1 year, and they have claimed that this was not a complex case. It was, as they said at the very beginning, that captured red-handed, quote unquote. What was your reaction, and have you received any evidence from Russia during this 1 year?
So let me just say that at the hearing today, Russian authorities did not provide any evidence of a crime. They just extended his detention for another 3 months. And despite their claims, they have provided no justification for holding him at all. And we believe there's a simple reason for doing that. It's because he has done nothing wrong. It's because journalism is not a crime. So we believe, as we have believed, that Russia should stop using individuals like Evan Gershkovich or Paul Whelan, who has been detained for 5 years, as bargaining chips. They should be released immediately.
The point that you just made about bargaining chips, have you exhausted your options in terms of defending him, getting him out of Russian jail?
I'm not going to speak to that in detail, but other than to say that, no, we continue to remain engaged on trying to secure the release of both Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, and that will remain a top priority for us.
On that context, I was also hoping you could help us put Arzu Kurmashovan's case into context. I asked this last week to Vedant, but if she is not wrongfully detained, then what is this all about, in your opinion?
So I'm not going to speak to that other than what Vedant said last week and what you have heard us say many times about the case. I don't have any new assessment to offer today.
Another question. I know you addressed yesterday Moscow attack. Just to going back to yesterday. The secretary also spoke to ISIS right this morning. Despite the fact that the terrorist group has claimed responsibility, Russian officials, most recently the spy chief today, keep claiming that not only Ukraine, the US, the UK, everyone's behind it. So how do you read that?
So first of all, it's simply not true. We've made that clear that there is no evidence at all that Ukraine was involved in this, because Ukraine was not involved in this. And I would say that those comments by Russian officials, including from President Putin, are just propaganda to justify their continued aggression against Ukraine. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matt. Last week, Assistant Secretary Donald Lu had stated that the U.S. is not in the favor of Pakistan starting work on the pipeline with Iran. Now Pakistan is consulting some law firms to see if the U.S. can give a waiver. Is there a chance for a waiver or no?
So I'm not going to preview any potential sanction actions, as I never do from here, or any actions involving sanctions, but we always advise everyone that doing business with Iran runs the risk of touching upon and coming in contact with our sanctions, and would advise everyone to consider that very carefully. And as the Assistant Secretary made clear last week, we do not support this pipeline going forward.
Just one more thing. Today, 5 Chinese who were working in Pakistan were hit by a suicide car bomb. 5 of them have perished. Do you also have the same feeling with regard to Pakistan doing business with China as well, especially with regard to the CPEC, or no?
So I would say that we, first of all, we condemn the attack on a convoy of PRC engineers in Pakistan. We are deeply saddened by the loss of life and injuries sustained, and share our heartfelt condolences with those affected by the attack. The Pakistani people have suffered greatly at the hands of terrorists. And I'll note that PRC nationals in Pakistan have also been the victims of terrorist attacks, and no country should suffer the acts of terror. And I don't have anything beyond that. Brian, go ahead.
Pakistan, Don Liu last week had said that he wants to see the Pakistani courts undertake an investigation into election rigging and irregularities. Today, as you may have seen, there was this extraordinary statement from 6 Supreme Court justices in Pakistan saying that they have been pressured, tortured, their families kind of abducted and pressured by the Pakistani military to put pressure on the court system. You know, what is the U.S. response to these judges coming forward rather courageously to make these claims? And does that undermine the confidence in the court's ability to kind of independently assess the election?
So let me just say with that, I saw the letter right before I came out here. I didn't have a chance to read it or to consult with any of my colleagues about it. So before I offer any definitive comment, let me take that back and consult with people and get something for you. Kylie, did you have something? No.
On Ukraine.
Ukraine? Yeah, go ahead.
The Ukrainians have recently said, after some reports about the U.S. warning them not to target Russian oil refineries, that they, understand those warnings, but they have certain military targets that they will continue to target. Can you just bring us up to speed with regard to those conversations between the U.S. and Ukraine, and if you guys have recently been telling them that they should not go after these Russian oil refineries?
So I'm not going to speak to specific conversations, but it has always been our position since the outset of this war that we do not encourage or support Ukraine taking strikes outside its own territory.
Okay, but there have been reports of this happening more recently. So have these conversations been re-upped, even though they've, been reiterated?
I'm not going to speak to specific conversations, but this has been our long-time policy that we have made clear to the Ukrainian government. So it's not something that they would, of which they would be unaware. Okay. Go ahead.
It has been announced that a territorial meeting between the Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan, Press Secretary Blinken, and President of the European Commission is to be held on April 5. So what items are on the agenda? Is any support for Armenia is being considered? Is it of a political, economic, or security nature?
So I'm not going to speak to it in detail, other than to say that our objectives in every engagement with the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan are to encourage them to work to bridge the differences that between the two countries and reach a durable and lasting peace agreement. Michelle, and then Simon, then we'll close out.
The High Court in London ruled today that Julian Assange would not be extradited immediately, and gave the U.S. 3 weeks to give a series of assurances around his First Amendment rights, and that he would not receive the death penalty. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, my comment is that you should take that question to the Justice Department, who can speak to it. We don't typically comment on extradition matters. I was a little flipped. That wasn't a comment after all. It's a referral to DOJ. They should speak to that. Simon, let me hold you off. I'm going to take a couple over here, then I'll come to you to close out. Go ahead.
About today's meeting between Secretary Blinken and Iraqi Foreign Minister, have they touched the disputes between Erbil and Baghdad in that meeting? And what does the U.S. view on the current disputes between these two cities. Do you have any concern about that?
So they did discuss that issue. The secretary made clear that stability between Baghdad and Erbil would bring economic benefits to all Iraqis. It would be good for the region, and that we encourage the two partners to work together.
And second question about the energy issue, which Secretary Blinken mentioned that they will discuss this in their meeting. It's been a year that the Karachi oil export been stopped, and the IOC, including the U.S. companies, has stopped their operations. And there's a dispute between the U.S. companies and the Iraqi Ministry of Oil. So the U.S. has been engaged with all parties to resume that exports. And in your point of view, why it hasn't happened yet, and then how does the U.S. work with the U.S. companies and also with the Iraqi government to resume that exposed?
So the U.S. has been engaged at the most senior levels on this issue, and we have urged all parties to reach an agreement to resume the flow of oil through this pipeline. We believe that restarting oil exports through the pipeline would be mutually beneficial to all parties, and because of that reason, that's why we'll continue to pursue it.
Thank you, Matt.
Go ahead.
The Taliban claimed recently that they have crashed ISIS-K in Afghanistan. However, we have seen that the ISIS branch has expanded its operation, particularly with the recent attacks in Iran, Moscow, also in Kandahar. How do you see ISIS-KP activities and operation in Afghanistan and also in the region? Also, Lindsey Graham yesterday said in a tweet, quote, we should be hitting ISIS-K targets in Afghanistan hard, disrupting their operation before it's too late. What is your reaction?
So we have long been worried about ISIS-K's potential for terrorist activities. You've seen us actually give warnings to Russia and Iran about these two most recent terrorist attacks, and you've seen ISIS-K plots disrupted in Europe. And so we have made clear that we need to remain vigilant against the threat of ISIS-K, and we're working with our allies and partners to do just that. And then I would say, with respect to Afghanistan, we have always said that it is important that Afghanistan not become a safe haven for terrorists who might want to bring harm to our Americans. We have demonstrated a commitment to hold terrorists in Afghanistan accountable, but we have also made clear to the Taliban that it is in their interest to counter violent terrorist groups inside Afghanistan. Simon, now we'll close out.
Just came in briefing a statement from Senator Van Hollen regarding your comments yesterday about the National Security Memorandum 20. So he's seeking some clarity on basically, what you said about this yesterday. Have you determined and what is the basis for determining that those assurances provided by Israel in line with the NSM 20 are credible and reliable?
So I do think there's been a lot of confusion around this memo really from the beginning. Let me back up and say that the memo required all of the 7 relevant countries, as well as other countries that are not in active conflict that we'll report later, but these 7 relevant countries, including Israel, to make assurances to the United States that they will not act in violation of international humanitarian law. But it has always been required that these countries that are receiving defense articles from the United States act in compliance with international humanitarian law, both in the use of those defense articles and in the provision of humanitarian assistance and in allowing humanitarian assistance to enter into the affected areas. That is not a requirement that was imposed by the NSM. It is something that was already required by U.S. law. And so we have already, before the NSM, had processes ongoing to assess Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law, both, as I said yesterday, in the use of those arms and as it pertains to the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And we have not yet reached any conclusion that they are in violation of international humanitarian law. So when we receive those assurances from the government of Israel and the governments of Ukraine and other governments, we look at those assurances and we look at them informed by the assessments that we have had ongoing. And as I said, the assessment, we have not reached the conclusion with respect to Israel that they have violated international humanitarian law. But those are processes that are very much ongoing. They didn't start with the letter. As I said, they were going on before, and they'll continue. And the next step is we are due to provide Congress a report. That's the next thing that's required by this memo on May 8th, where we will get into these issues in more detail.
So to try to clarify that,
Simon has the last question.
Make sense of that a little bit. So you haven't reached the conclusion that Israel have violated international humanitarian law, but have you reached the conclusion that they haven't.
That is,
has any process concluded?
So we haven't
that found that they haven't breached.
So
the
the processes are ongoing. That's when I say that that these processes to assess their compliance with international humanitarian law are ongoing. They have not reached a definitive conclusion. Now, the way this usually works is we have partners that we provide defense articles to. They use those defense articles. You see allegations at times that those defense articles are used in violation of international humanitarian law, and we assess them, and those assessments are ongoing, and those assessments could reach a conclusion at some point that there were violations of international law or that they're in compliance with international law, but those ongoing processes remain ongoing and not terminated at this point.
Given this war has been going on for nearly 6 months, then can we assume that there have been some incidents that have been fully assessed, that have taken place during this war that people might have seen, we could. There's a few that have come up in this meeting, and there's been incidents that you've then raised with the Israelis. Have there been incidents that have gone through whatever black box process this involves and come out at the end with a sort of a green tick with the US saying, we're fine with this?
So it's hard to answer that question without getting too much into internal deliberations. I will say that the way these processes work, as you would expect, right? You look at any kind of thing, they have different levels that they move through. There are a number of incidents that have been raised as potential violations of international humanitarian law that we are able to look at with a very quick assessment and determine that no, there's an actual justification for this action, and it does not violate international humanitarian law. We look at a particular strike, for example. There are others that are more complicated that require an extensive fact-finding process and taking those facts and applying them against the law, and a number of those are ongoing.
Can you say whether by May 8th, when you provide this report to Congress, will you be able to say something conclusively?
I just can't speak to where we might be on May 8th at this point. So it's a month and a half away. So
just to clarify one thing on that, when you're saying we have not yet reached the conclusion, you're talking about the whole, since the beginning of the war, you're not, because it could be almost interpreted as we have not seen yet up until now, certain acts in violation of international U.S. law, basically. You see what I mean?
I don't. The way maybe other people do. I'm just slow, but I don't see what you meant.
You say we have not yet reached the conclusion that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
You could interpret that by saying we have not yet made the determination from October 7th up until today that they have done something against international law. That's not what you're saying. You're saying the whole assessment, you haven't yet made a conclusion on the whole assessment, right?
Again, I'm not sure if we have not concluded in any sense. And again, you have to look at, these are all, like when you come to the use of weapons, it's a determination you have to make with respect to individual strikes or individual campaigns or individual acts. And so we have had ongoing assessments to look at some of those, and in none of those have we yet found violations of international humanitarian law. I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure.
And you have not found any violations.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are ongoing.
I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure. And you have not found any violations.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are ongoing. I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure if have gone through an entire process. Because some of them, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are different levels. I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure if have gone through a process. That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are different levels. I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure if have gone through a process. Yeah, that's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are different levels. I don't know if that answers the question, because I'm not sure if have gone through a process. That's correct. That's what I meant to say. But a number of them are different levels. Has only been around for 47 days now. So that we have an active process to figure out what that's going to look like. But I can tell you that we will follow the obligations of the memo and send that report to Congress by May 8th. So with that, we'll end today. Thank you, everyone.
All right, you're just listening into that State Department briefing. Of course, they talked briefly about that bridge collapse in Maryland, and of course, certainly watched just a different international flag that it was flying, and there were some questions about that. They didn't get into a ton of detail here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, the live picture still out there is we're following this as it approaches almost 12 hours since it struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge there in Baltimore, Maryland. Coming up in just a little bit, the NTSB providing an update. We've heard from the governor of Maryland, the Baltimore mayor, as well as President Joe Biden. We'll take you out to all of these here in a little bit, but let's slide away first for a quick 2-minute break.